Hello and welcome to this, a quick overview of my thoughts on the upcoming Resident Evil 7 release, and how the series has changed over the years, and just what seems to have been implemented and why it might have been implemented in the upcoming release. So, firstly, what has changed based on the demo? Well, the most obvious change is quite clearly the shift in perspective, from the third-person mode used in Resident Evils 4, 5 and 6 to fully first-person. This is possibly a nod to actual horror releases in the last 5 or so years, such as Amnesia Dark Descent, the sequel title A Machine for Pigs, Outlast, Alien Isolation, and other titles. All of these use the first-person perspective to build tension and add to the horror focus of their stories. Part of the power of first-person is that the player's vision can only be faced in a focused direction, and if something happens behind them, they have to really swing around to judge whether they are actually in danger or not. Now, naturally, this is much easier to do when you're in third-person, as the camera has a much wider field of view, and it makes swinging around like 360 to check for danger a much easier and quicker process. And this, therefore, works against building tension, as the player naturally feels safer in the supposedly scary environment. This is a large part of what made the first few games scary as well, as whilst they weren't in first person, they did have a fixed camera perspective. This meant that if you heard a monster approaching, you couldn't manipulate the camera to easily locate it and combat it, or flee. Oftentimes it would be approaching from the next corridor on, where you couldn't see it, or it might even be lurking in the corner of your current location, where the camera, because it's in a fixed perspective, couldn't quite see it, and therefore you couldn't pinpoint where to shoot. In this limiting way, a fixed perspective camera is quite similar to a first-person camera, and they both enhance the horror experience. This limiting effect of the first-person view can be seen at one point in my playthrough, where I hear a monster behind me, and I take at least a couple of seconds to actually locate it, by which point it's clearly way too late. Now I will admit I'm a terrible player, but I feel it's part of the deliberate decision of the developers to go first person in order to make the experience that much scarier. This first person view also works wonders with dark environments, as if you are equipped with a torch, which in the demo you are, you have to take a lot of time to swing your beam of light across the otherwise invisible environment. This takes time and focus, therefore forcing the player to scrutinize any gruesome or slightly creepy objects in the darkness surrounding them, further forcing them to absorb the game and its creepy atmosphere, which as a developer works to your favor. So, you know what also has been added to Resident Evil 7 that works really well with first-person horror? Puzzles. Yes, I know, the golden age of point-and-click titles has been and gone, but the first few Resident Evil titles were largely puzzle-focused, and this, whilst likely a legacy of the point-and-click age, did work very well alongside the horror genre for a number of reasons. Firstly, most puzzles require the locating of an item in order to complete another item, which then, when activated, would somehow unlock either a new tool or a completely different section of the environment or game. As one would expect, finding this item would require searching and exploration. Now, this is a huge deal in a horror game, as in a horror game it can easily be said that the biggest villain is in fact the environment. When the main villain is nowhere in sight, it's the creaking floorboards, rattling windows, and other ambient noises that keep the player on edge. When you see that figure waiting to grab you, and you cautiously advance towards it, and it ends up just a mannequin, that's the environment playing with your fear. This is also massive, simply because oftentimes in a horror game, if the game is good enough, the player will cease wanting to explore, and will instead want to progress as quickly as possible in order to avoid future scary encounters that aren't necessary. By incorporating puzzles, the developer ensures in some ways that more of the game will be experienced by the player, as they have to complete puzzles in order to advance. And so, through these puzzle elements, the developer enhances the player's time within the horror game. This is why all the previously mentioned horror titles did in fact utilize some form of puzzle solving in their games. However basic it might have been, it just works so well with horror. These reasons are likely a large part of why Capcom have reverted to this design choice, alongside of course attempting to win back the favour of longtime fans of this classic series. With this shift in design direction, Capcom are banking their chips in the horror of the survival horror genre, and therefore we can expect the action side of this series to, some might say finally, take a back foot. So, discussion of game design over. I'll wrap this up with just a few opinions and questions. Firstly, I'm super hyped for the return of Umbrella as a corporation and main bad guy, which is somewhat hinted at when we find in the demo this photo that depicts an Umbrella helicopter with the Umbrella logo clearly on the side, with the words on the back of the photo saying, "Are they watching us?" So from this, can we infer that Umbrella still exists and are continuing to experiment on the inhabitants of this house, or even the surrounding region? Based on the fact that the house doesn't seem that big, perhaps it is likely that we will end up exploring the outside region. Or maybe we'll just go to the nearby shed to pick up a saw or something. I don't know. And in all of this, where are the previous main characters of the series? Will we see Chris Redfield make another appearance? Maybe at the end of the game. Who knows? And which virus is actually at work in this game, based on the monster that we see in the gameplay? Personally, I would maybe hedge toward the Ouroboros virus, as the monster seems slightly kind of in that style of slightly tentacly, but maybe it's a hybrid virus, maybe it's evolved by itself, who knows? And whatever the answers to the aforementioned questions, I can honestly say at this point that I am looking forward to the full release later this month. I'm not sure what day it actually is released on, but either way, I'm pretty hyped, and yeah, it should be a good time. Hopefully Resident Evil returns to its survival horror form and shows all these upstart newcomers how to do the genre justice. So, that's it for now. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.